Calliope's Tale by FalcomReynolds. Chapter 4. Calliope. The mermaid, as it turned out, could breathe both underwater and in air. They found this out when she escaped her chest cradle and hid underneath Captain McCullough's bed for 3 hours while they frantically searched the ship for her, hoping one of the crew hadn't hurt her. Though they'd left those that disliked her behind in Kanzaru, with a warning not to return if they still bore her ill will. She'd been discovered when Captain McCullough, exhausted and defeated, had sat on the bed and heard her giggle. Her little form was already growing larger. She was perhaps 1.5 meters long, but most of it was tail. Ianthe lifted her up and tried to replace her in the chest, and she wrapped her tail around Ianthe's torso and waist and refused to let go, clinging to her shoulder. "Oh," Ianthe said, staring the mermaid in the face, trying to figure out how to hold her. "Interesting," Captain McCullough said, watching from the bed. Ianthe finally got her arm around the mermaid and held her up carefully, glad she was as strong as she was. The mermaid's big dark eyes stared into hers. "Do you want to go up on the deck?" she asked after a long moment. "Bah!" the mermaid said, grinning. The sight would have been cute in a human toddler. In the mermaid, it was a little frightening, given her mouth of razor-sharp teeth. Ianthe glanced over to McCullough and took a deep, nervous breath. "I'll go with you," McCullough said, and stood. They headed up to the deck. The first to notice them was Aisha, who was climbing down from the rigging. She turned and stopped, staring. "She can breathe out of the water," Ianthe explained, shifting the weight of the mermaid a little bit. She moved the baby to her hip and felt her tail tighten as she shifted. "Oh," Aisha said, swallowing. She glanced around. "Leng!" Ianthe glanced back. Leng, over by the helm, looked up. "Yeah," he said, and then spotted the mermaid. His entire face lit up, and he abandoned his task immediately to come leaping over the railing down onto the deck. "Hello," he said, stopping just before them. The mermaid blinked curiously at him, then reached out. Instinctively, he put a hand up, and she grabbed it, curious, and tugged. He laughed, startled. Her simple pull was strong enough to move his entire form, slight as he was. McCullough glanced around. A few other crew members, now realizing what was happening. McCullough glanced around. A few other crew members now realized what was happening, and several were drifting over to see what was going on. The mermaid blinked in the bright light, glancing around, and was observing the pirates until the glint of the sea caught her eye. She batted Ianthe's shoulder with her tiny hands and pointed. "Bah!" Ianthe glanced over. "Sure," she said, and stepped forward. The crew parted for her to go by, and she walked all the way to the edge, where she held tight to the mermaid and looked out over the endless horizon. "There's the ocean," she said. "That's your home. That's where you came from." Her heart raced. At any moment, the baby mermaid could try to escape, try to wriggle free and make it into the water. If she got out, there would be no getting her back. The mermaid did not try to escape. She looked over the sea, then up to Ianthe. "Ma?" she asked. "Mm-hmm," Ianthe said, as if it was a real question. "The ocean, yes. Someday, that's where you'll go back to. But for now, you're here, safe with us." McCullough came up next to her and glanced over at the mermaid. "You're too small to go into the ocean now," he told her, folding his arms and staring out towards the horizon. "When you're bigger, maybe." "Bah," the mermaid said, sounding vaguely disappointed. Ianthe glanced over at McCullough, expression frozen. Did she understand that? "I have no idea," McCullough answered slowly, also caught unawares. "I'm not sure if I like that answer or not." Ianthe used her other hand to shift the mermaid's position again, and almost jumped at the feeling of that rubbery tail squeezing her midsection. It would take some time to get used to that. You're smart, aren't you? Smarter than a human toddler, anyway. The mermaid pondered this, then smiled again, all plump cheeks and needle teeth. She laughed. Ianthe shook her head, caught between amusement and alarm. Sure, she said. Sure thing. They named her Calliope. Ianthe suggested it. It reminded her of her home, in the warm waters between the white rocks and deep, dusty green olive trees, where her family had moved 200 years before and stayed. It reminded her of the wind chimes in the sea breeze, and the smell of lemon and sugar rising from the bakery down the hill, and the flock of seagulls that frequented the shore, the far-off splashes as eagles and pelicans dove for fish in the bay. It meant beautiful-voiced, and Ianthe couldn't get the name out of her head after the first time Calliope sang. It was evening, and the setting sun sent lances of brilliant orange light through the thick glass of the window in the captain's office cabin. Ianthe, who had been carrying the mermaid around all day, while Giulia and Sirio, two of the deckhands, cleaned the chest cradle and washed the seaweed and coral. It was clean now, filled with new water, and Ianthe watched the mermaid splash around and immediately started biting at one of the pieces of coral. Ianthe turned around and exhaled, looking to the captain. Well, I think... A low, melodic hum filled the cabin. Ianthe stopped short and turned back to the mermaid, floating where she was, resting the coral on her chest. What? She began. The mermaid opened her eyes and hummed again, this time cycling through a few startlingly pure tones, and Ianthe felt her head spin. She looked around quickly and found a spot to sit down before she fell over. Kalari's breath, Mikola whispered, eyes wide. The little mermaid hummed to herself again, then stopped, looking between the two cautiously. She seemed to be waiting. I can't sing, Ianthe said desperately, looking to Mikola. When? I know you can. What? I'm not. When? You have to. She swallowed hard, remembering Ababuo's advice. You have to sing with her, if you can. We have to listen. We have to join her. Ababuo told me it was important when I met her. We can't withstand her voice otherwise. Mikola paused for a moment, then sighed and dropped his head. All right, he said. All right. Ianthe let out a breath. He stood and walked over, steady as stone through the gentle rocking of the ship, then knelt next to the chest and paused for a moment before humming a few notes to himself. The mermaid caught them immediately and mimicked them back at him. Mikulo raised his eyebrow and glanced over at Ianthe, then hummed a few more, then launched into a quiet rendition of one of the oldest shanties Ianthe had ever heard, the language stilted from hundreds of years of disuse. Sing upon the waves and sing upon the sea. Ride the swelling tide and forever we'll be free. Sing upon the waves and sing upon the sea, till I come home to thee. The mermaid couldn't do the words, not yet, but she mirrored the sounds of the letters in a noise that was frighteningly similar to human speech. Ianthe remained where she was, watching, as Mikulo went into the second and third verse, then back to the first. Watch the stars and moon go deeper through the night. Hang a crescent from the mast to be our lantern light. Watch the stars and moon go deeper through the night, so keep your lantern bright. Always moving onward, never do we rest. Wind within our sails and a new wave to crest. Always moving onward, never do we rest. At our true love's behest. Sing upon the waves and sing upon the sea. Ride the swelling tide and forever we'll be free. Sing upon the waves and sing upon the sea, till I come home to thee. Calliope immediately seemed to pick up on how music worked, and instead of copying Makulo's notes, she began to dip into a harmony line, flicking the webbing of her ears back as she listened to the tones resonate against each other. Her child's voice was clear and high-pitched, and she wound her line through Makulo's song like a seamstress. Ianthe wished she could sing, wished she could join them. The ringing tones the mermaid produced still made her head spin, but as she listened, they seemed to daze her less and less, even though she could hear the fizz of magic along the edges of the notes, like the soft hissing of surf receding on the sand. Ianthe closed her eyes and listened. Consequently, Calliope's first words were those of a song. It seemed to be the best way to teach her language. She understood the melodic sounds more than she did ordinary speech. Much to Makulo's embarrassment, one of the crew members managed to teach Calliope the word daddy, which was something he had been avoiding. They weren't this mermaid's parents, and he wasn't about to tell her that they were. But now there was no stopping her. She referred to him as her father, and that was that. Ianthe teased him about it. "Goodness," she said, watching him sit next to the chest, reading a book. "Who knew you had a child and a secret wife at sea?" "Please," Makulo growled, rolling his eyes. "I'm trying to read." "To your beautiful daughter." "Ianthe, I will throw you off the ship." She laughed. "Don't be so mean in front of your only child, Win. How could you? What kind of example are you setting right now?" He shook his head and went back to the book. Within 3 months of her first coherent words, Calliope was able to formulate coherent thoughts. "What is?" she asked, when one of the oysters she ate contained a pearl that she nearly choked on. "That's a pearl," Ianthe said, from where she was, kneeling next to the chest. She'd run over and immediately given Calliope a swift thump on the back to help her cough the thing up. They hadn't actually expected there to be pearls in the oysters Lang had gotten from the bottom of the bay this time. At least, not ones large enough to be noteworthy. "Why hurt?" "They don't, normally," Ianthe told her, "but you're not supposed to eat them." Calliope narrowed her eyes at the pearl in Ianthe's hand, then held out her own. Ianthe, cautiously, dropped the pearl into her little fingers. "Nasty," Calliope muttered, glaring at it. She immediately brought it up to her face and put it back in her mouth. "No, wait," Ianthe said belatedly, as Calliope bit down on it. The pearl crunched and crumbled into shards, which the tiny mermaid chewed to paste and swallowed. Ianthe stared. "I win," Calliope said triumphantly. Yes, you do," Ianthe replied, still stunned. She had no idea how much the pearl could have been worth, but she wasn't about to chastise the mermaid for eating it. She didn't know any better. Maybe in the future she'd save them. Also, she'd just eaten it. Ianthe hadn't even realized that was possible. She made a mental note to keep her fingers away from Calliope's mouth.